Luka Doncic, after fouling out last night, made some comments in the post-game interview that rubbed myself and a lot of people the wrong way, where he was asked about the fact that he fouled out and how the refs were in this game, and he said that it was tough that they, quote, couldn't play physical because of the refs. And for Luka, who, listen, it has been a storyline the entire postseason, really for a lot of his career as well, but so much so that it seemed like the Mavericks were having these moments where they were having to sit Luka down and almost intervention style say, you have to stop talking to the referees. For him to be complaining about the extra calls is just something that was very ironic overall, because of the fact that if you look at the way that the Celtics approached this Game 3 matchup against him, it was clear, especially from the perspective of these bench players, where Luka is one of the best players in the NBA at seeking out mismatches and taking advantage of that. But it was clear that the Celtics specifically sat down their bench unit, and it seemed like they said, listen, you are going to get picked on when you're on the court. And it seemed like it was this level of scouting, of understanding Luka is going to try and bait you into fouling him. And there were a couple instances that really stood out to me. There was one in the second quarter where Luka was trying to post up Peyton Pritchard. He backed him down, and then when he tried to sort of lean into Pritchard to then throw up the shot, you could see Pritchard almost dip. I believe it was his right shoulder, basically underneath Luka's elbow, where Luka was trying to initiate this contact, and Pritchard understood that and was able to avoid it, forces the miss there. There was another instance with Sam Hauser when this was in the first quarter, where Hauser, he got put into the game, and almost immediately Luka was trying to put him into some action. He had a tremendous game. It was the 3-point shots, which was massive for him, but there were multiple instances where PJ Washington tried to post him up at one point. Kyrie tried to put him in isolation, and there was one instance as well with Hauser where he was guarding Luka, where Luka had him on the right wing, and he drove in, and Luka was throwing all of these different pump fakes at Hauser on the right elbow, and he ended up ultimately having to settle for a fadeaway after Hauser didn't bite. And overall, it just sort of played to the fact that I thought that Luka spent, as he does frankly a lot of the time, spent too much of the game focusing on the referees on both sides of the ball, where he wasn't playing his game. He was trying to play the referee game, which is obviously a part of sort of his masterful offensive approach at times, where he is able to sort of get less experienced players to foul him. But we've seen this with James Harden for a decade plus, where whistles aren't blown quite as much. And listen, I understand Luka fouled out. We're going to dive into that as well. But, you know, Luka ended up finishing this game 11 of 27, 1 of 7 from 3, where on some of these three-pointers, he's falling down. And to the James Harden comparison, when you are playing a 7-game series, there is going to be a level of scouting from these rival NBA teams that you just don't get on a night-to-night basis during the regular season. And Luka was, again, it seemed like so fixated on trying to put these bench players of the Celtics in compromising positions that he ended up hurting himself. And he really struggled in this game as a whole. We've talked about some of the defensive numbers as well. ESPN put up a graphic this morning during one of their shows where Luka, it had some horrendous stats in terms of defensively, the highest blow-by percentage allowed on drives in a playoff series in the past decade, Luka has the top 3 worst blow-by percentages allowed. It was 59% against the Thunder in the conference semifinals, 65.2% against the Clippers in the first round, and now 67.7% against the Celtics so far through 3 games in the finals. And Luka has been given all of this praise for the effort that he's been putting out on the defensive end. I just don't feel like it's accurate to what we are actually seeing on the court. And now people are sort of turning around, and now that people are seeing it, I don't want to bash Luka and say he's not a top X player in the NBA, because we know how incredible he is. But this is very clearly a real flaw in his game. And I understand that Luka is dealing with these injuries, and hopefully it's something that in time he can sort of correct and work itself out. But ultimately, it's a real issue right now, injuries in this postseason or not. And some of that also plays into the conditioning, where that's why, along with the Celtics going at him so much when he's on defense, that it does just provide this extra level of the conversation surrounding his conditioning, that he needs to be better conditioned in these types of games. Again, also, for whatever it's worth, the James Harden comparison, we have talked about that with him as well. And, Luka, again, I don't want to take away from this postseason run in general, because there is a 0% chance the Mavericks could make it to this point without Luka. So he deserves tons of credit for the Mavericks being here in the first place. But to see him have that type of a game in Game 3, where it's at home, you actually get the performance of Kyrie Irving surrounding him, it is really frustrating as a pure basketball fan to see him then go in the post-game interview and basically blame the referees. And Brian Windhorst of ESPN had a pretty epic bashing of him after the game when he was on the Scott Van Pelt show afterwards, and I really did agree with the majority of what he was saying. There is a level of maturity that Luka still needs to come to. Keep in mind, 25 years old. He's been playing basketball for a decade plus professionally when he was in Europe as well. So, again, a young player who has, you can say, overachieved basically his entire life in regards to his basketball skills. But there is a level of maturity that he still has to hit. That's something we said about this Celtics team on the other end for a number of years now. And this idea of when Jason Kidd throws out the idea of Jaylen Brown as their best player, trying to play mind games between him and Tatum, the Celtics have learned to just drown out all of the noise, all of the criticism. Been one of the most heavily criticized teams to have the level of success, 79-20 on the season as a whole, and that level of maturity. And part of that was falling in the NBA Finals a couple years ago. This is an experience Luka is going to have to learn from, and I believe that he is fully capable of it. Now, Windhorst also said an interesting point in terms of somebody from the Mavericks or just somebody in his life needs to sit him down and sort of lay out the understanding of what is going on with your interactions with the refs. And Windhorst said that nobody has done that in his entire life, which is a little bit harsh, but also the way that Luka acts. I mean, he was basically begging for a technical foul for a lot of this game, getting up in the faces of referees. There was one clip after, I forget exactly what play it's after, but Luka, who also, keep in mind, all of these things baked into one conversation. There were numerous instances where the Celtics were able to have numbers going the other way because Luka would fall down, sit, pout a little bit, and argue to the refs before actually running back on defense. And that's where the Celtics got some of their best looks on the night as a whole. So again, all this to be said, I don't want to diminish Luka and how incredible of a player he is, but this is sort of the part where, after making 5 straight All-NBAs and understanding how incredible he is, that he's in the MVP conversation. He's a top 4 player, I think, definitively. I'd probably have him, top 3 even. Between him, Jokic, Giannis, I believe that that's the top of the top. Again, all subjective. You can argue in the comments if you'd like to, but ultimately, again, we know Luka is elite, but once we get to this point in basketball discourse where, especially when we see you on the biggest stage with the most consequences there, we are going to talk about some of the shortcomings. And again, we can appreciate everything Luka has done in the postseason up to this point and also acknowledge that there is room to grow. No NBA player is perfect. And for Luka, it has to be, as much as it's the defense maybe, I think that the number one thing for him is the mentality of trying to abandon this constant complaining to the referees, because his skill set when he is firing is one of the most fun players to watch in the NBA. But at the same time, again, it is just so hard to watch him after every single play go and yell at a ref. But let me know if in the comments section if you think I'm coming off too harsh, what your thoughts on his Game 3 performance were. But we are going to look on the other side of this finals game next, talking about the finals MVP, where as of this morning we have a new favorite to win, how this is all sort of shaped out, and what the odds currently look like. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.